darkness, and we're going to find ourselves contributing to the will of Satan rather than the will of God. What did they want to do? Put Lazarus to death. Why is that so problematic? Well, God had just raised him to life. So what are they doing? They're setting themselves against the plans and the purposes of God. Once more, they took counsel, also the high priests, in order to put Lazarus to death. Verse 11. But many many left them of the Judeans. Now this is an important part. This is what I referred to earlier. It literally says, but many of the Judeans left them, and they believed in Yeshua. So important. We see a remnant of those from the Judeans. Once more, this is the second time it's mentioned, and we're talking about a greater number. Not referring to the same ones that came earlier, but additional ones. Because of seeing Lazarus, they knew that he had died. They were the ones who had comforted the family, and now he's alive. He's eating. He's praising God. And therefore, they also put their faith in Yeshua. Verse 12. Now, once again, I told you, in order to understand the revelation of John, we need to understand the festivals, the biblical festivals of Israel. And we have something that takes place. Look at verse 12. We read here, and on the next day, a great crowd that had come to the feast, when they heard that Yeshua had come to Jerusalem, what did they do? We read, and they took palm branches, and they went out to meet him, and they cried out. Now, before we talk about the significance of what they cried out, I want to speak a few minutes about what they took. It says they took palm branches, not palm leaves. Many times in Christian churches, we have what's called Palm Sunday. Now, what they teach on that day is wonderful. But the symbol, a palm leaf, is not what they took. They took a palm branch. Why is that important? Because a palm branch has significance in Judaism. Now, we don't take them usually on Passover. We take the palm branch with other species of vegetation, and we make what's called a lulav, and we wave it. We shake it in each direction, north, south, east, west, up and down. How many directions? 6 directions. Why? Because we're proclaiming the grace of God. We do that when? On the Feast of Tabernacles. That reminds us of the 40 years in the wilderness, in the desert. What should the desert teach us? Dependence upon God. What's the absolute evidence of someone trusting, depending upon God? The answer is they will seek God's grace. So Israel proclaimed God's grace for the purpose of people who depend upon God to receive His grace. If you're not a recipient of God's grace, you're not someone who has ever depended upon Him. So these individuals, knowing who He was, what did they do? They took their palm branches. Now, there's another tradition, and that is close to Passover. In fact, in the morning of Passover, when we destroy all the chametz, all the leaven, we burn them, there's a tradition to take that lulav that we use for the Feast of Tabernacles and burn it up. So they would have had that palm branch nearby. And they wanted to do something. They wanted to say that He's the grace of God that overcomes the judgment of God. And they're going to make a great statement. But before we deal with that statement, more than likely next week, I want to tell you something. How those palm branches are appearing again in the book of Revelation. You look sometime at the book of Revelation chapter 7, and we have an image of the heavens and those who are part of God's family. Why do I say that? We're talking about a group of people from every tribe, nation, language, and people. They're standing before the throne of God, the throne of the Lamb. And what do they have? White branches. They have been white garments, a white robe, Why do they have that? They've been purified. And what are they holding in their hands? It says, and they have a palm branch in their hand. What do we glean from that? Well, what the book of Revelation is trying to teach us is this, that we find purity through dependence upon God. And whenever we're talking about dependence upon God, what should come into our mind? The grace of God. So these individuals, they understood something. They understood who Messiah is. It's Yeshua. What he came to do, to be an instrument of God's grace. And how he was going to provide that? Well, that's why he came for Passover, in order to lay down his life. Now, they may not have understood that he was going to die all this great multitude, but they understood this is the festival of redemption, Passover, and they knew that he was the Redeemer. And they came out to welcome him. Why? Well, what do we see here? It says, on that next day, this large crowd, they came out who had come up for the festival. When they heard that Yeshua had come into Jerusalem, they took these palm branches and they went out to meet him, and they cried out this wonderful expression, this word, Hosanna. Now, literally, in the biblical language, it's Hoshana Na. What is that? It's from the word Hoshea. Hoshea means save us. And the word na is a plea. It's like begging. So Hosanna means save us, please, O Lord. It's a term of desperation. And if we really understand our spiritual condition, we will know how desperate we are for redemption. And we will seek redemption through the Passover lamb. And that's why Yeshua is called, by the first way that he's referred to by John, is this Lamb who takes away the sins of the world. That is, this Lamb of redemption. Well, once again, I'm out of time until next week when we continue on in John's Gospel and chapter 12.